I am the Lord of Limbo. Today, I shall share with you two chilling tales that reveal how even the quietest, most peaceful farmlands can hide the darkest and most unnerving secrets. These are not the typical ghost stories or tales of the supernatural you may have heard. No, these are the kind of experiences that make you question the very nature of what we perceive as real, set against the backdrop of endless fields and abandoned barns. These are stories of things that can't be explained, whispers in the wind, and shapes in the dark. They are the stories of those who have lived on the land, only to realize that the land itself may not be as peaceful as it seems. Come, listen closely, for what you're about to hear may just leave you with a lingering sense of unease, as the unknown often does. My name is Terry. I grew up on a farm, a small plot of land tucked away deep in the countryside. The kind of place where the land stretched for miles, the soil rich and fertile, and the only sounds you'd hear were the rustling of the wind and the occasional animal. My family had lived there for generations, but the land always felt heavy. There was something off about it that no one could quite explain. The farm wasn't big, but it was enough to keep my family busy. We had cows, chickens, and a few acres of crops. The house itself was old, really old. My grandparents had built it, and by the time I was born, it was already creaking and groaning with age. It sat at the edge of the property, with the fields sprawling out in front and the woods starting just beyond the back of the house. There was an old barn a little further back, where we kept the tools and hay for the livestock, and a small pond nearby where I used to fish with my dad. I'm sure you're wondering why I'm telling you all this, but the thing is, that farm, that place, it holds something I can't explain, something I can't forget. I don't like to think about it too much, but the events from one night still haunt me to this day. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and had just come back home to help out after finishing some schooling in the city. Things had been quiet on the farm for years. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful at times. One evening, around the end of summer, I found myself out in the fields. It had been a long, hot day, and I was checking the fences for any breaks, making sure the cows weren't getting out again like they did the week before. The sun was low, casting a golden light across the land, and the air was thick with the scent of grass and dust. Everything was normal at first, but something felt wrong. It was subtle, just a strange sense that the world around me wasn't quite right. As I walked through the field, I could hear the wind moving through the trees in the distance, but there was something off about it. The sound wasn't natural. It was almost like it was moving in a pattern, a rhythm, like it was breathing. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was just the wind, but the feeling kept building. As the evening wore on, the temperature began to drop, and the sun disappeared behind a thick blanket of clouds. By the time I finished walking the perimeter of the property, it was nearing twilight. I headed back toward the barn, which stood like a dark, looming silhouette against the twilight sky. Now, I know the barn. I've been there countless times. It's always been quiet, but that night, there was something different. As I approached, I noticed the doors were wide open. The barn had a heavy, creaky set of doors, and usually, they were latched shut by the end of the day. My dad was the type to make sure everything was secured before dark. I didn't think much of it at first. It's not like it hadn't happened before, the wind or an animal might have nudged the doors open. But as I stepped inside, a sudden coldness hit me. It wasn't the coolness of the evening air. This was something deeper, like the air itself had been chilled for years. The barn was dim, lit only by the fading light from outside. As I stepped further in, I noticed the silence. It was too silent. I didn't hear any animals moving, no rats skittering along the wooden beams. It was as though everything inside had frozen. I made my way past the old tractor and hay bales, but then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was the creaking of the old floorboards above. I froze in place, my heart pounding. The barn was empty. I knew it was empty. We hadn't stored anything in the loft for months, but the sound continued, slow, deliberate, like someone was walking up there. I called out, thinking it might be one of my siblings playing a joke on me, but the only answer I got was the silence of the barn. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something to happen. And then, there it was, soft footsteps, but not in the direction of the stairs. The sound was coming from directly above me, as though someone, or something, was pacing overhead, moving back and forth. My skin prickled. I slowly backed out of the barn, my eyes never leaving the darkness inside. I decided to check the back of the barn, maybe see if there was a way up to the loft that I had missed. As I walked around the side, I saw something strange in the field behind the barn. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but as I looked closer, I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. A person, or at least, I thought it was a person. They were too still, too rigid. I couldn't make out any details. They were just standing there, almost blending into the darkness. I called out to them, but they didn't move, didn't respond. After a few moments, I felt a chill run down my spine, and the instinct to run surged through me. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back to the house. I didn't look back. When I reached the house, my heart was racing, my breath shallow. I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady myself. I knew I had seen something, but the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Who would be out there, in the dark, in the middle of the fields? I went inside and checked the windows, but there was nothing. The house felt quiet. Too quiet. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up, listening for any sounds, waiting for the footsteps to start again, for the figure to return. The next morning, I went back to the barn, determined to find an explanation. There were no signs of anything out of the ordinary. The doors were shut, and the loft was undisturbed. I searched the field for any tracks, anything that might give me a clue, but there was nothing. And yet, something stayed with me. A feeling, a sense that the farm wasn't as it seemed. That something was watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of my understanding. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing games with me after a long day. Maybe it was something else, something I'll never understand. All I know is that I haven't set foot in that barn since, and I never will. To this day, I don't visit that farm anymore. I keep my distance. Something about the place still feels off, like there's something lingering in the shadows, waiting for someone else to come back and see it for themselves. I'm not sure if I want to know what it really was. Maybe it's better to just leave it alone. My name is Carl. I was born and raised on a small farm, deep in the heart of the countryside. It wasn't the sort of place people visited for fun. It was isolated, surrounded by dense woods and hills that seemed to stretch on forever. The nearest town was miles away, and even then, it wasn't much of a town. A few houses, a single gas station, and a small market that sold everything from canned beans to old tractors. Our farmhouse wasn't anything fancy. A big, old two-story house with a wraparound porch, wooden floors that creaked underfoot, and a tin roof that made a constant clanging sound whenever the wind picked up. There were cows, a few horses, chickens, and a couple of pigs we'd keep in the back. My father worked the land, and I helped out when I wasn't in school, doing everything from feeding the animals to fixing fences. I never thought much about the place being eerie until that one summer evening. It was late August, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields. I had just finished mucking out the stalls, and I was walking back to the house when I heard something odd. It wasn't a sound I could pinpoint at first, just a strange, muffled noise coming from the direction of the woods behind the barn. Now, I'm no stranger to the noises of the forest. There's always something moving out there, deer, raccoons, squirrels. But this was different. It was almost like a whisper, faint and low, carried by the wind. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the usual rustling of branches or maybe the wind itself playing tricks. I went into the house and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper. It was one of those hot, sticky evenings when you could barely breathe, and the air seemed to hang heavy in the room. "You hear anything weird out there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up from his paper, eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" I told him about the noise from the woods. He didn't seem too concerned, but he did pause for a moment, as if considering something. "Probably just a bird or something," he said, brushing it off. "Don't worry about it. You're probably just tired." I figured he was right, so I went up to my room to rest for the night. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That whispering noise kept playing in my mind. Later that night, long after my dad had gone to bed, I heard it again. This time, it was louder. It sounded almost like voices, soft, distant, but unmistakable. I got out of bed, pulled on my boots, and went to the window to see if I could spot anything out there in the darkness. The moon was almost full, casting everything in a cold, silvery light. I could see the shadows of the trees moving in the wind, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the whispering continued, and now it seemed closer than before. I was about to turn away when I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the tree line. I thought maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no, it was definitely there. A person, or at least, it looked like a person. Tall, thin, with what looked like a hooded cloak, standing completely still. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was clear enough. I froze. The whispering grew louder, almost as though it was coming from this figure, though I couldn't hear any words, just a low murmur. I don't know why, but I felt a sudden surge of panic. It wasn't normal. Nothing about it was normal. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, as if it were waiting. For the next few hours, I sat in my room, the curtains drawn tight, not daring to make a sound. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just someone walking through the woods, or maybe the wind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. The next morning, I didn't mention anything to my dad. I didn't want to seem crazy, especially since he hadn't seemed worried the night before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen, whatever it was still out there. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Every evening, just as the sun began to set, I'd hear that whispering sound again, faint at first but growing louder with each passing day. I would check the windows, look out at the woods, but there was never anything there. It was as if the figure, or whatever it was, had simply vanished. But I knew it wasn't gone. I could feel it. Every night, I'd hear those whispers. And sometimes, just when I thought I was imagining it, I'd catch a glimpse of something, movement, just beyond the trees. One night, things took a darker turn. I was out by the barn, locking up the animals for the night, when I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see my dad, but no one was there. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I thought I heard something again, the faint sound of a voice calling my name, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Carl." I quickly turned and ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me. I don't know why I was so scared. Maybe it was the isolation of the farm, the endless stretch of darkness surrounding me. Maybe it was the knowledge that whatever was out there, whatever was whispering in the woods, wasn't something I could understand. After that night, I didn't go near the woods again. I avoided the barn, avoided the fields. I stayed inside as much as I could, the whispers haunting me whenever I went to sleep. It's been years now, but I still think about that time. I still hear those whispers in the back of my mind, and I can't help but wonder if I'll ever understand what happened. What was that figure in the woods? Was it just my imagination? Or was it something else, something I'm still not ready to understand? I still don't visit the farm much anymore. The place has changed, and so have I, but every time I think about it, I can almost hear those whispers, calling me back into the woods, where the answers might be waiting. And so, my friends, the stories of the land remain, stories that linger in the shadows, whispered by those who dare to listen. The world may seem calm, even peaceful, on the surface, but sometimes, it's what lies beneath that gives us pause. Whether it's the eerie silence of a field at dusk or the strange figure lurking just beyond the tree line, some things are better left unexplained. Remember, not all that seems familiar is truly safe, and the boundaries between what we know and what we fear are thinner than we think. Keep your eyes open, your senses sharp, and never forget that there are things in this world that we may never fully understand. Until next time, stay cautious, stay aware, and always be wary of the unknown.